Welcome to the Syneos Health Podcast, Conversations on Commercialization. I'm Tyler Cowan, Vice President of Syneos Health. In this series, we explore the strategies and innovations shaping healthcare today and tomorrow. This episode was recorded at the Fierce Pharma Week in Philadelphia, right in the heart of the action. Let's dive in. I'm back with Mark Bard of Digital Health Coalition to look at what's next for biopharma. We left off starting to discuss what I think is a really important part of our business, how AI impacts our ecosystems of treatment and care.
I'm going to use that to sort of bridge into what I think is a really important part of our business and part of the disease treatment ecosystem and the care ecosystem, which is the impact of AI, which of course, it's the most used acronym over the last 2 years. It just has to be. But how do you see, from your lens with DHC, AI really impacting these pharma brands and the way that they engage today with the HCPs and with their target audience?
Yeah, I always go back to, I love the old days of the Gartner hype curve, technology adoption curve, where with digital it was overhyped. This is going to change nothing to the build out period. It happened with digital, it happened with mobile. And in some ways, it happened with the pandemic where it was, oh, wow, this changes everything, to, oh, we overthought this, to, oh, it changes some things forever. And there were certain parts of the commercial model that were not going back to the way it was. And you look at AI, the same thing. So now we're 2-3 years, depending on how you define it. A lot of us like to go back to ChatGPT as that.
Yeah, we're still sort of fairly early.
Very early.
The experience of AI.
It was going to change anything. And I think it's interesting from a timing and public perspective. You got this study from MIT that came out recently that went completely viral on 95% of pilots fail. And then everyone, of course, peeled back and said, how are we defining failure? What is learning? Obviously, pilots teach us a lot, and we can learn more from failures, what didn't work. And I think that's where you go back and you say, okay, let's talk about physicians. Let's talk about ACP, what's going on in AI. Those early ones where when we would go out and talk to the industry and say, okay, what are these use cases, was obviously the way we would describe it. And I think in some ways too, just to give that context, is we had digital, we had mobile. AI is no different. It's that big of a catalyst, changes the game. And then you say, where are the use cases today? And what you saw very quickly was things like real-time translation of HCP or KOL content, where now you just radically took what may have been a 10-hour process down to 10 seconds or real time, and you had brands and companies saying, this is amazing. I can have an oncologist speaking, and I can have real-time translation of this content to push. And it's like, these were processes that were happening, not manually, but we were using different resources to do this, and you say, boom, done. What was the big thing over the past couple of years when we would go out and say, what are you using it for today? It was this broader bucket of generative, right? And what you saw is, I can 10x my content. Now here's the better question is, should you 10x your content? Because if you're not making great stuff and you just produce more volume, I think then it goes to, well, who's reading all this stuff you're creating? Where this gets really crazy in a good way is, of course, now what's the AI word of the year, and probably for the next couple of years, agentic.
Agentic AI, yeah.
There's agentic internally within the company, and that's another conversation of, how do we get more efficient? We can do the work of 5 to 10 analysts by setting up, maybe 100 in some cases, setting up these tools to redo or information aggregation and summary type insights. That then helps back to the physician in the sense of, if you've got automated tools that generate insights for you to help you do better engagement, it's internal, but it's coming out. The other side of that is the agentic from the physician to the company. And then you look at these things around medical affairs. It could be broader customer.
I was going to say, medical and scientific affairs liaisons, and this idea of creating an agent that can, the AI agent can pull directly from the PM. They can change accents, they can change language, and they can do this all on the fly. So a physician gets truly, to your point earlier in our discussion, they can have absolutely customized content provided to them just by asking the right prompted questions.
Yeah. It's almost a little unfair is that every company out there experimenting with chatbots, this is even going back 10 years ago, and they were terrible. The consumer ones were even worse, right?
The one on Apple was terrible. That's my first experience.
Well, even Pharma. So Pharma would roll out these chatbots, and by the time legal got through with what you could say, all you could say was call the 800 number.
Right.
We started to see better use of these first level chatbots.
That's a good way to put it.
Right. And then we go into more advanced. And I think that's what we're saying. And I hope we can kill this word chatbots because it's such an oversimplification of text messaging and stuff. What is the game changer now is a lot of the folks, probably like you and I, who play with a lot of these tools now is they're voice-based. So you can talk to them conversationally, even maybe text as well. But these are conversations, and they're getting back to you in conversations. And now it becomes so rich and so real where it's not, you think of the phone tree example where you're just yelling, agent, 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 I got to get out of this.
I pressed 0 5 times.
Yeah. so now we're saying you have conversations and you can correct it in the sense of saying, this is right, I didn't like this, can you follow up on this? And it does it extremely well. Agent, just switch and bring in some of that consumer stuff as well. This is where it gets fascinating, and I think we have to figure out something like agentic for a consumer. And I mentioned chatbots, for example, and we still haven't quite figured those out. When I build a health agent, who do I want to build that with? Maybe it's a WebMD, maybe it's a Google, maybe it's my insurance company, which I don't know. Personally, I'm like, I don't want to have an agent with my insurance company. And then it's, do I want an agent from Pfizer? And these are really good questions. And I think you start to think, how many agents can you support? So Tyler may say, great, I want one agent for fashion that's going to interface with all the brands I deal with. I want one for maybe sports and entertainment or shows or something. And then I may have a health agent, but that's a great question of, are these independent companies? Who's going to own part of that relationship? Or could it be a technology company that just has great technology that now I'm picking my sources that are going to drive the health agent, but maybe the same company maintains, such as a Google, it's one example, is maybe this Gemini agent is going to maintain my relationships in these different categories and help pull information. And where this really clicks, and I think we don't have the great examples in health yet, but I love going to other industry conferences or technology stuff outside of this industry. You go and you see what's happening in retail, and it is mind-blowing. You set up the agent, it goes out and creates your wardrobe based on your preferences, does automated scrapes based on how you set it up, buys your things and sends you. You can essentially have agents in the same way as say, plan this trip and keep looking. And when you find the ones that meet these parameters, not just send me information, just book it. And we're there. And what's the interesting in healthcare now? You say, take my information, I'm ingesting, I'm putting all this stuff in, I'm trusting it. Help me plan out what I need to do. Oh, you may want to do a lab test follow-up on this. Oh, hey, prescriptions are an obvious one of, hey, you need to follow up with this, or hey, your insurance coverage is going to drop off at this point for this one, and you got to renew this cost savings program and others. Well, do that for me.
I am someone who certainly plays with the AI tools, and I've used them all. Doesn't matter what my particular preference is, but I did notice that over the last year, a year ago I would ask it a question and it seemed like an independent one question, one answer. And now I'm seeing, let's say I asked a question about GLP-1, it would say, based on your previous questions around workouts, I know that you're somewhere around 50, that you're fairly active, and it's starting to pull some of that information forward. When we start to horizon glance, keeping with that context of what's happening in the industry and how do we keep the human in the loop, the human in this case being the HCP, is there going to be a place where we get that AI starts to say, based on everything that we've quote unquote spoken about, there is concern that you may be developing this disease. I think about cognitive decline with older parents where you use AI all the time. If you scraped, you may actually be able to see some of those gaps before sometimes even the patient recognizes that those gaps are there. Is that where we're going as we start seeing how to incorporate AI into our health ecosystem?
Yeah, and this is part of that fascinating discussion about at what point is predictive coming into recommendations, coming into thinking. And there's a couple categories where this is relevant. Things like financial, legal, and health. So you see a lot of these. This is not medical advice. This is not financial advice. This is not legal advice.
I'm not a doctor, but this is what I think.
And we can figure out ways around that with the rights disclaimers for financial and legal. Healthcare gets very weird because now you're going to intersect advertising. So now you've built this profile. It knows your background. It knows all your searches too if you're on Gemini, right? And now I'm starting to give recommendations based on things you've put in. You've got intent. And in some ways, at what level is this making recommendations? How much are just information displays and how much are recommendations about you should go do this? You may want to learn more about this product. And that's where it gets incredibly contextual and relevant, where you now have this whole patient journey and you use AI very differently than you use traditional search because you're having conversations. I can get very detailed and then you start to think, well, okay, what do we do with that information? I know so much about you personally and all your searches. How do we think about that? And I think if it's done right, it's that whole value exchange where you're saying relevant advertising works. It just feels right. But we have to always avoid that creepy factor. And we're going to have some creepy factors in AI very fast in the sense of maybe what you're doing in AI, now connecting back to connected TV, connecting back to other things. And you're saying, if it feels right in a good way where it's like that reminder message I just saw, I should probably follow up on that. But at the same time, yeah, we're getting into this area of when it's telling you, hey, based on these things and what you've looked for and the questions you've asked, you may have this. Now we're into, it's not a symptom checker anymore. It's not what we used to think of, I have a question and it tells me to ask my doctor these 3 questions. Is it giving me medical advice? Is it acting as a medical professional? And I think these are good questions we're going to have, and it's not a bad thing. Financial services, as I said, we can learn from other industries. There's stuff you can do now to have it start to automate, not take the action and buy the investments or sell or do something, but wow, these are really automated approaches now to say, here's all my information, plan this out and tell me what I need to do. And the next step is, well, then just do it. You've got automation, but intelligent automation. We see it in financial services, we're seeing it in legal very quickly. We're going to see it in health. And what always comes back to me was that something with one of the OpenAI folks not long ago, they were at an event, and education and healthcare were their two big things they say that they went through, how it's going to reinvent and turn these industries upside down. Education, I think we all get, right? Anyone who's had a child involved in education, you see a lot of room for improvement.
Yes, you do.
You don't teach the same thing to every student. People learn differently and they want different content differently. And healthcare, certainly. When you say this is an information-based business that's based on curation, insights, and not forgetting things. And these tools can help us do that, remind you of things you need to do, give you advice based on your search history, based on other things that have happened. And you say, hey, I'll pull in some of this information from my physician as well that may be in the mix. So I think that's where it does get really exciting to say, improve your quality of life, improve your convenience, but it's your permanent memory in the sense of it doesn't forget things.
It's so fascinating to me because, I have an elderly mother and I never get through all of the questions that I think I should be asking the physician because I have a truncated amount of time. And I think about with AI, I would love the opportunity to be able to scrape what are the questions that my mother has asked, what are the questions I've asked, and maybe that even gets provided to the doctor, because back in the day, I'm old enough to know a time where you had 10 minutes of chinwag, so to speak, with an HCP, and the HCP may have uncovered other things about you during that conversation, whereas now it's a little bit more transactional. Why are you here? What's happened? Let me look at your lab tests. There's less time, it feels like, for a little bit more of that contextualization that's ultimately human. And some of these Grok agents or Gemini or whatever you use actually have that look back past of these are all the things that you've been concerned about over the last 6 months between when you saw your last physician. I wonder if there's an opportunity, to your point, and I don't mean this as a rhetorical, is there a way to say, hey, give me an output AI agent of all the things that I've had concerns about over the last 6 months, and let me share that with the HCP, or better yet, is there a way to get that to the HCP before I go for my yearly physical?
Yeah, to share it as a summary, and one could be summarize everything I've been asking about. The flip side of that, which I think is fascinating, it kind of started as a little bit of a joke where it's you build the history within the platform and then you would say, what am I missing as a person, or what faults do you have? And it would based on your history, and which is fascinating. Some people are like, oh my God, that's spot on. Like if it's a psychologist analyzing you in terms of your history, why can't we do it in healthcare? You've asked all these questions and now you're flipping it back and saying, what questions did I not ask based on everything that we've done? And now it comes back and says, actually, you know what? You need to ask these. And that's the beauty of all this, where you say, wow, I didn't even think of that. And you had the inference, the intelligence, the reasoning to be able to say, you've asked 10 questions, you forgot these 2, based on everything else you've been asking me. And I think that's where it clicks. And the same thing, when you talk to doctors using these tools now, they love AI scribes, they love these summary tools. And what I hear from a lot of physician friends is, it asks questions that I didn't think of myself. One that clicked for me too, a friend of mine, a surgeon, when the early days of the robots, the Da Vinci, all these early on, the surgeons were saying, that's cheating, right?
For sure, there was a fear about them.
Yeah, and then what happened was the high-end surgeons would almost consistently say, it makes me a better surgeon. And what you hear now is physicians saying the same thing, the AI makes me a better physician, because it doesn't forget, I'm a human. I can't possibly remember all these things. I've got all these patients, I can't remember all your information. It summarizes everything about you.
And with HCPs in particular, physicians, I do consider the idea of treating patients to be a science and an art. It's where it sort of beautifully comes together. And it'll be really interesting about AI is that there may be something that the human who's actually in front of the doctor didn't think of the fall they had 4 months ago as being relevant to a discussion about dementia. But if the physician had visibility to the fact, hey, tell me about, it looks like you fell about 4 months ago. That may or may not be relevant, but the physician then has the opportunity to ask and include that in his or her understanding of where that patient might be. So it's going to be a fascinating future. I really want to thank you for the time.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. Enjoyed it.
That's a wrap on this episode of Conversations on Commercialization. Catch the rest of the series and subscribe to the Syneos Health podcast wherever you get your podcasts. If you have other topics you would like to hear from us about, send a message. to podcasts@syneoshealth.com. For more future-focused, actionable life science insights, visit Syneos Health Insights Hub at insightshub.health.